Welcome back to episode 22 of the Two Thinking Apes. Tonight we have Dr. Jennifer Hsu. So Jennifer is a research fellow in the Public Opinion and Foreign Policy program at the Lowy Institute. Prior to joining the institute, Jennifer was a policy analyst with China Matters. After completing her PhD at the University of Cambridge, she researched and taught in development studies, political science, and sociology in universities in North America and the UK. Jennifer is also a visiting fellow at the Social Policy and Research Centre at UNSW. Her research expertise broadly covers state-society relations, state-NGO relations, civil society, and the internationalization of Chinese NGOs, and she has published widely in these areas. Well, welcome, and thank you for coming, Jennifer. The first question I probably ask that Costin and I were talking about before is what made you kind of get into that space, and what was the start of your kind of academic journey down this space?
Well, thanks for having me, Taylor and Costin. It's been a varied journey to where I am now. So as you mentioned, I started off as an academic. I taught sociology as my first real academic job when I finished my PhD. And then that was in upstate New York. And then I moved to Canada, to the province of Alberta, and taught political science there for 7 years. And then somehow made my way back to Sydney, but also did a year of studying of art history. So yeah, I guess where I am now is still doing research and still doing writing on areas that I'm really interested in, just with a bit more of an international affairs, foreign policy focus at the Lowy Institute. But my interest has always been in China, the politics and the society of China. And yeah, over the years, that focus just shifts depending on A, I guess, the job that you have, and B, how your research evolves, and how it's shaped by current affairs, which is, I guess, some things that we are reading and hearing about every day, and that is China in the Australian media.
Can I ask for, how did you end up studying overseas, and what was that like? What made you come back here as well?
I was about to ask that too. It's like, how did you find going from country to country studying? Would you recommend it?
I really loved my time studying overseas. I really, really enjoyed that. I have made, some of my best friends, talented people who have gone on to do various different things, not just in academia, but people who have worked for international banks, in finance. They've started off teaching, may have started off teaching, but have ended up in different areas as well. So I think there is a real luxury, I guess, of being a student, which you guys should embrace. And if you are still studying or thinking about studying in the future, really, if you have the opportunity to really engage with the material that you're being given or asked to research on. Why did I want to come back to Australia? I think being away from Sydney for so long, my parents are here. I just wanted to be back. I guess I've been away for, I don't know, probably 15 years. And just the desire to be closer to your family, that kind of grows as you get older. And it was, I feel like it was the right move. And since coming back, I've had a son. Just I think as you grow older, your priorities change.
I was originally supposed to go to Spain for study. I just finished last week at uni.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But COVID, so I couldn't get to travel, which sucks. But it is what it is, I guess. I came to terms with it. But we'll see. I was an earful to Costin for a bit complaining about that. But anyway.
Yeah, a little while.
Hopefully there are opportunities opening up, not just to study overseas, but also just to travel for leisure and maybe perhaps work in the future, Taylor. So,
We'll see.
I feel like you guys are in your 20s.
Mm.
There's lots of road to travel still. So yeah.
Yeah. We'll see how things go this year, I guess.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. I read a couple of your articles. I want to get straight into the good stuff. So I wanted to ask you, I saw you touch on a lot of stuff about like CC, Chinese Communist Party, interfering in Australian institutions through like community organizations. Is that a thing? And could you touch on like instances where that's happened and Australia's response to that? Because I wasn't really aware of that kind of playing out.
So the paper that was released last week, which I co-authored with my Lowy Institute colleagues, Richard McGregor and Natasha Kassam, looks at Chinese community organizations in Australia. And the paper is in a way trying to broaden our understanding of how Chinese community organizations have evolved over time. As we note in the paper, some of them were established in the 1970s and perhaps even earlier. And they were really, these type of organizations that were established in the 70s and 80s were really servicing the newly arrived immigrants coming not just from China, but from Southeast Asia who have Chinese ethnic heritage, those from Hong Kong, Taiwan. So they were, these organizations are still, many of them still involved in the settlement of newly arrived immigrants by connecting them to, say, English language classes, other community members who've been here longer. The newer organizations, which is sort of the second part of the paper, were established post-2000s, really in tracking with the migration that we've seen increase over time since 2000s coming from mainland China. And those organizations that were established post-2000 are much more focused on the economics and the business opportunities that mainland China provides. So really establishing networks for newly arrived immigrants to reconnect back with mainland China. Now, some of these newer organizations have been featured in Australian media, both old and news. There's a few of them that have been sort of the focus of Australian media reports with regards to foreign interference in Australia's politics and society. But those organizations are very few, but they have been the subject of intense focus, particularly by politicians and the media. And that really skews what we try to argue, skews the focus of what the majority of Chinese community organizations are doing within the Australian community and with Chinese migrants, whether they be from mainland China or elsewhere. So I think the issue of foreign interference is there, or foreign influence is there and present, but we argue that these organizations, by and large, and for the majority of Chinese Australians, have very few or very seldom interaction with these organizations. So I think you can think about as an immigrant, as a newly arrived immigrant, you want to be connected with those who are culturally and linguistically similar to your own. But as you slowly adapt to the community and the society that you've migrated to, your networks become much broader beyond the immediate ethnic and cultural communities that you identify with. So I think we have to think about these community groups and organizations and individuals associated with them within a much broader framework of the migration process and the process of adapting to a new society and culture as they arrive into Australia.
In terms of the organizations, are they just like cultural organizations? Like I know, like I'm Turkish, there's like Turkish clubs, that kind of, is it just that kind of thing when you say organization?
So there are different types of organizations. There are those that focus on migrant resettlement. Then there are these associations mainly formed by those coming from mainland China that are associated with their hometown or province. So here in Australia, there are a number of these provincial associations like the Australian Guangdong Association or the Australian Heilongjiang Association. They're meant to, because China is so vast and each province has, essentially their own type of culture based on, there's also linguistic differences across the provinces as well, that these associations are in many ways characterized by the province where the migrants are from. And then there are sort of, other types of organizations that are more business oriented, like the chambers of commerce. So there are a number of different types of organizations for different purposes.
And in terms of the foreign interference, that would be like a very tiny percentage of within all these different organizations. Is that what kind of the paper was suggesting?
So some of these organizations, a very small percentage of them have, strong or frequent interaction with the Chinese government, the Chinese party state. And, we shouldn't base interactions, the type of interactions as anything sort of nefarious. But some of these organizations like the Australian, I always get it right, the Australian Council for the Peaceful Promotion for the Reunification of China, that organization has been named frequently in Australian media and also by ASIO, so Australian Security Intelligence, as having links with the Chinese Communist Party state. So, I think we have to look at what's the evidence out there. So Australian Security Intelligence suggests that the ACPPRC has frequent interactions and connections with the Communist Party state. Now, I'm not going to debate whether that is the case or not. I simply put it out there as it's referenced by ASIO. So there are a small minority percentage of these organizations that do have links with the Communist Party state.
And what would Australia's response be? Because I'm assuming that there'd be an overstep, because I feel like it's very easy to not distinguish between the Chinese people and the party and the different actors. So like, how has like Australia's response been to that, and Chinese Australians been affected by that as well?
So up until recently, I would say Australians or Australia government's response have been unable or have failed to differentiate between the actions and activities of the Chinese Communist Party state and that of Chinese Australians. So, the two are lumped into the same category, China as being, representative of this very sort of multi-stakeholder environment. So I think up until recently, both the Australian media and the Australian government have failed to differentiate between activities of the Communist Party state and the Chinese Australian communities and that of the Chinese people living in mainland China. So, but I think that's improving quite significantly. So I think the media has come to differentiate much more frequently in its reporting, that when they report about the activities of the Chinese government, they say the Chinese government or the Chinese party, Communist Party. And we should note that, the actions of the party state does not represent the interest or the activities of Chinese Australians, or the Chinese people for that matter. So it's necessary to distinguish between what the government does and its people and the communities of Chinese people here in Australia. Just
How do you think? Oh, sorry. How do you think people could? How do you think people could better differentiate between those things? Because I've read a lot of things, and I know there's a lot of stigma, as you've been saying, between that comes as a result of people not being able to differentiate between the Chinese party and the people. But how could someone like me or Talon become more aware of the differences?
So I think one thing to think about is the Communist Party is not elected. It's not an elected representative body. The Communist Party might say that it's representative of the Chinese people, but it is an authoritarian. China is an authoritarian regime with a one-party state, and it seeks to present a unified voice by trying to eliminate difference. So this homogenized voice, which they present as that of the Chinese government, what they want us people outside of China to hear is that voice of the people is the same as the voice of the government, and we know that that isn't the case. There are dissenting voices. So we can think about this. The Australian government, when it projects when it seeks to project a unified voice, we know there is lots of dissension, right? What the government's stance on climate change probably doesn't represent the majority of Australian or young Australians' view about the issue, right? What the government wants to do with regards to environmental damage or coal mining doesn't necessarily represent the majority opinion. So I think we have to think about projection of voice. Does it represent the entirety of the people by any government? Probably not, right? But the Chinese party state does want to present this homogenized, unified voice. But there are so many different ethnicities, for one, within China. There are, the diversity is as vast as you will find it in Australian society. So it's, sometimes it's somewhat inconceivable to think that there is only one voice on a particular issue in China when there are, 1.4 billion people. It's I would find it incredulous to think that every one of those people feel the same way about
anything.
Anything. Yeah.
I forgot to ask the foreign interference when we're talking about that, because from our experience, we've mostly interacted with international students coming in terms of Chinese-born Chinese people.
Mm-hmm.
Are there instances of foreign interference when it comes to university students? Because we obviously get a lot of international students in our universities.
And the property market as well.
I can't answer about the property market. I'm an economist, so that's a bit outside of my remit. But so Human Rights Watch Australia released a report in June this year about that very topic that you mentioned. So the impact of the Chinese party state on international Chinese students studying here in Australia. And the report shows that, in a number of incidences, and they went in depth into interviewing these students, international Chinese students. Many of them were fearful of being what the report says as doxed. So these students are fearful of speaking out or speaking their minds in class, whether it is in class or in a social situation. They're fearful of being reported back to sort of Chinese authorities for what they are saying or what they are doing. And those incidences relate to sort of, the Hong Kong Democracy War. Many felt that they wanted to participate, but they couldn't jeopardize their family back in China. If they were reported on, their family members would receive a visit from the Chinese police. So, those are scary, but incidences like that do occur. So I think Chinese students are by and large wary and cautious about what they do and say. And that is in many ways against the academic culture that is inherent in Australian universities, and that is, academic freedom to participate and to say and discuss, issues that may be contentious.
I can't imagine that. It's very interesting. I can't imagine living like that. In terms of the Australian-Chinese relationship, like at the moment, because there was a lot happening with Australian buying those nuclear submarine deal with America and the UK, and all the tariffs on, I forgot what they were, wool and things like that. Is our relationship with China like at a low at the moment, would you say? Like, how do you see the future of our relationship? Will it improve? Will it get worse?
So Australia-China relations are at an impasse. They are at an all-time low. Many said last year the relationship wasn't at an all-time low, but this year it is a new low. So I think the trend is possibly downwards. But what does the future hold for bilateral relations between Australia and China? Well, the submarine deal that Australia signed with the UK and the US is definitely a thorn in the bilateral relations. But I think, I guess one other thing to mention is that China is seeking to join this comprehensive trade partnership.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, that involves I think 13 nations at the moment. So China has made an application, or is seeking to make an application to become part of this trade bloc. But it needs the unanimous agreement by all member economies or member states to agree to that application. So if Australia dissents, then China won't be part of that trading bloc. But it is a complicated and long process to become a member of the trading bloc. So I guess if China is serious and has expressed a desire to join the trading bloc, then it may start to shift the balance of this bilateral relation a little bit. But we're yet to, I think the trading bloc economies and countries will soon discuss the merits of these applications, or the potential of applications.
Isn't Taiwan trying to join as well? Is that right?
Yeah, so Taiwan is seeking to join the trading bloc, and it has made probably a much more advanced. It has advanced its application process much more than China, because to be part of this trading bloc, you have to meet numerous standards, right? In terms of one of those standards is you have to allow freedom of association in terms of workers joining trade unions. So workers ought to be allowed to decide which trade union you're allowed to join. Eliminating forced labor. So these are all conditions that applicant economies have to meet before they are admitted. And we know that there is no freedom of association in terms of joining trade unions in China. There is one trade union. Standards on forced labor, that is not ratified by China. So yeah, so these are sort of really tricky issues for China to have to grapple and deal with if they want to be part of that trading bloc, whereas Taiwan has forced through and made those necessary changes, as painful as they are, in terms of standards required to within the economy to be part of the trading bloc. So it's much further ahead in its application.
How significant is this trade bloc? Do you think it's worth it for China to make all those changes, or are they just better off keeping business as it is?
Well, if it doesn't make those changes, then it can't be part of this trading bloc. So
But will it be a noticeable loss for them if they're not a part of that bloc?
Yeah, good question. I think it would be the loss of face would be one. The face is really important. The notion or the image of not wanting to be embarrassed in a public forum is really important within Chinese culture, and to be unsuccessful in application would potentially be a loss of face for the Chinese government. But there are so many of those standards that for them to have to meet that it's really hard to see China becoming of that part of that trading bloc, within the next few years. So
would there be an issue if China and Taiwan both get accepted? Do the two, because they don't recognize, does China not recognize Taiwan? Is that right?
China sees Taiwan as an inseparable
part of it.
Yeah.
So how would that work?
How will that work? So they're admitted, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're admitted as economies rather than as states. So as a state, you're recognized as having sovereignty, whereas if you're an economy, it doesn't matter. It's not necessary to have sovereignty. Don't quote me on that.
Legal loophole.
But I think, yeah. But I think at this, if you believe in free markets and the capitalism, then there is room for both China and Taiwan, because it's based on trade and economies. And when there's freedom of movement of products, then that's part of this, what we live in, a capitalist society. So, but obviously politics is such a big part of what the trading bloc has to manage. So I can't speak for the 13 economies and states that's part of the trading bloc, whether there's room. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. I want to ask one more question along the trading bloc. What do you think the best? Do you think it's wise for the Australian economy to, because China will obviously need Australian support regardless because it's unanimous. Do you think it's wise for Australia to decline that support in terms of that whole idea of take a stand, join the US, buy the subs, that kind of thing, or adopt a regional?
I think one of Australia's priority is to get into dialogue with China again at the ministerial level, which hasn't happened. So from the Australian government side, it has made clear that it wants a restart in high-level discussion with their Chinese counterparts. If China wants Australian support, I guess, in this trading bloc ascension support. So I don't know. I think that process is really long. The application process is really long. So I think for Australia's side, it wants to restart high-level dialogue with China, and it's using this trading bloc as a bargaining chip with China in a way.
Are the tariffs even really affecting Australia negatively between China and us? I feel as if we're coming out of it a lot better than China are.
Well, I think, Australia is just one of the economies that China trades with, and China trades with the US, the EU, much more medium-sized economies like Canada, UK. I think for some industries in Australia that have been subject to Chinese tariffs and trade strikes, for example, the wine industry in Australia have suffered much more acutely than other areas. So some of the wine exporters in Australia, have really high percentage of their exports singularly focused on China. So to have then the trade strikes affect, these companies, wine companies, it's really hard to immediately find a market that will take, the volume that China has taken from Australian wine exporters. So some industries have been affected much more acutely, like wine, lobster. Lobsters, these are all perishable goods. Lobster, there's only so many days that lobster can sit on a tarmac before it perishes. Same with wine, right? So it's for these industries to pivot overnight is really inconceivable. And you have to find, and then, for Australian lobster exporters, they have to meet the standard requirements, say, for exporting to other countries. So there's lots of things that an exporter or an exporting company has to meet in order to export to other countries, and standards is one of them. So if they don't meet the standards of that country, they can't export there. And those approval of standards take a long time.
Yeah, I was very surprised that I don't know, because I learned it in geography a long time ago when I was in school, that China was one of the biggest importers of Australian wine in the world. And I had it's like completely off topic from anything, but I wouldn't have picked it. I don't understand why. Our wine is pretty good, but it's not like that good.
I don't know wine, mate.
No, neither do I. But
I think it's, the volume in which Australia produces wine. It is possibly cheaper. I don't know. But, they have successfully marketed, Australian wine producers have successfully marketed in China as a high-end product, as a luxury item. So, Australian wine has done really well up until last year or beginning of this year in China. I guess you can market anything to any population if you know your audience. And I don't know if you guys watch Gruen on ABC, with Will Anderson.
I've heard. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the panel looks at the success or failures of marketing campaigns, and if you know your market and you know your audience, then the potential for success is there.
I think that's a good spot to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions, Costa?
No, I was more taken for a ride on this one because I was just more taking it all in. Because I don't know much about this stuff. That's why we do the podcast. We also learn as well as our listeners.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the time, Dr. Hsu. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, well, I always learn lots when I listen to podcasts. So, that's what podcasts are for. They're both entertaining and educational.
We've learned a lot from this. We've done it. This is 22 now, episode 22. Yeah. We've learned a lot. Mm-hmm. We've talked to it's amazing. I think we've talked to so many different people, and it's only we're just doing it on Zoom.
It's definitely a change from just construction every day. To be honest, it's good to get a bit of intellect into my life apart from concrete.
Yeah, I can't believe you've got time to do podcast custom.
Oh, that's
You
why
know,
I'm
the
still
hours
in
you
my work. Still
Oh,
in
he's a
work clothes.
machine. He's a machine. This guy's a bit of a workhorse. I'm in the gap between working. I haven't started working. I mean, finished uni, haven't started working full time. So I'm just chilling all day, working casually, things like that. And he's the one
He,
working.
he likes to remind me he's going camping tomorrow for a couple of days midweek, and he's been telling me about 17 times about it. And I'll be running around
Did
pouring
you guys
concrete.
study together?
We went to school together.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
good. We've known
High
each other.
school?
18
Yeah.
years.
We've known each other for 18 years. He likes to flex that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, statistically speaking, we're 23. Not many people get that far.
Yeah.
Long-term friendships are important. They mean a lot when you get to my age, I have to
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
Well, not many
your
people can put up
paths
with Taylor's
diverge.
bald head.
Yeah. He's going to go to
Good on you
England.
guys for doing it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye.
Will you let me know when you're